There's something mysterious that happens when an Aries goes quiet. No warning, no explanation, no drama. They're just gone. You text them, no reply. You check social media, crickets. You try to convince yourself they're just busy, but deep down, you know something deeper is unfolding. Because when Aries disappears, it's never random, it's not a tantrum, it's not ghosting, and it's definitely not weakness. In fact, it might be one of their greatest powers. We live in a world that romanticizes extroversion, fast connections, constant updates, performative hustle. And in that world, Aries often plays the perfect role: bold, fearless, loud, magnetic. They take up space unapologetically. They light up rooms and dominate timelines. But here's what almost nobody sees. Behind that fire, behind that leader, behind that unstoppable spirit, lies a powerful truth. Aries loves being alone. And not just loves it, they need it. Not for isolation, not because they're angry, but because their soul demands it. Think about it. How does a wildfire recharge? How does a storm gather strength before its next strike? It retreats. It builds in silence. That's what Aries is doing when they vanish. In solitude, Aries doesn't wither. They sharpen, they train, they plan, they rewire, they reawaken. Their alone time isn't emptiness. It's a forge, a sacred space where the impulsive becomes intentional, where scattered thoughts crystallize into vision, where pain transforms into purpose. And that's what we're uncovering today. Welcome back to Zodiac Secrets Revealed, where we don't just describe zodiac traits, we decode the soul beneath them. And today, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood truths about Aries. Why does the zodiac's fiercest fire sign crave solitude? And how does that silence become the fuel for their next rise? By the end of this video, you'll see Aries in a new light. Not just as the warrior, but as the silent strategist. Not just the loud trailblazer, but the sacred loner. Not just the fire, but the forge. Because Aries doesn't vanish to escape life. They vanish to become something more powerful than anyone imagined. And when they return, the world feels it. Let's begin. Reason number 1, freedom to move at lightning speed. Have you ever watched an Aries try to wait? It's like asking a wildfire to burn politely. There's a restlessness in the bones of Aries, not the anxious kind, but the electric pulse of pure momentum. Even when they sit still, you can feel it. Their leg bouncing, fingers tapping, mind darting ahead before the moment even finishes arriving. But in everyday life, that wild current is constantly hitting a wall, the wall of other people's pace. The truth? Most of the world moves too slowly for Aries. Imagine this, you're on a road trip with an Aries. You're cruising at a relaxed 55 mph, enjoying the scenery, casually discussing where to stop for coffee. Meanwhile, Aries is gripping the wheel of life internally, wondering why you're not already 100 miles ahead, scouting 3 new locations, and planning a mini business while at it. For Aries, the external world is a bottleneck, a speed trap. And nothing feels more suffocating than being forced to hit the brakes when your soul was built for acceleration. That's why being alone isn't just a preference for Aries, it's liberation. When they're alone, no one tells them to slow down. No one asks them to pause, to explain, to justify. No one is holding them back from operating at their true, uncensored velocity. And at that speed, magic happens. I once worked with an Aries entrepreneur who ran 3 businesses simultaneously. She didn't drink coffee. She was coffee. During meetings, she'd nod politely, but you could tell her mind was 6 slides ahead. But it wasn't until she was alone, behind closed doors, in her creation cave, as she called it, that she truly lit up. She would reorganize entire departments in a weekend, blueprint campaigns in a single night, and launch initiatives in hours that would take teams weeks. No distractions, no approvals, no breaks. That is the Aries zone, uninterrupted velocity, pure fire, no seatbelts. And it's not just about doing more, it's about being aligned. Aries thrives in rapid flow, where thought, action, and outcome move together as one. That flow gets constantly interrupted in group settings. They have to explain their instincts, wait for others to catch up, dumb down their inner tempo to meet the world's comfort level. Being alone is the only time they don't have to apologize for moving fast. It's not arrogance, it's oxygen. They're not trying to leave people behind, they're just built differently. Think of a racehorse forced to trot alongside toddlers. That's Aries in a room full of hesitators. So when Aries disappears, it's not about you. It's about finally hitting their natural rhythm without having to carry or convince anyone. And the result? An explosion of progress that looks chaotic from the outside, but is actually precision-fueled instinct at work. But here's where it gets deeper. When Aries is free to operate at their native speed, they remember who they are. Not the performer, not the leader, not the translator of instinct into explanation, just pure, unfiltered flame. And in that state, they do their best thinking, their best building, their best becoming. If you're close to an Aries, don't take their silence as distance. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is let them run. Because they'll return, sharper, stronger, more lit up than ever. Just don't be surprised if when they come back, they've already built the next empire while you were finishing your coffee. Alone is not lonely for Aries. Alone is the only place fast enough. In the next part, we'll explore something even more surprising. Why Aries uses solitude as a sacred energy recharge, not by resting, but by fighting their own inner wars. It's not relaxation, it's recovery, and it's deeper than you think. Ready? Let's go. Reason number 2. Strategic energy recharging. People assume Aries never runs out of energy. That's the illusion. The truth is, they just know exactly when to retreat to protect the fire. If Aries were a machine, they'd be a jet engine, designed to operate at high altitude, high speed, and maximum pressure. But even jet engines need maintenance. Most people misunderstand Aries' legendary energy. They think it's endless, indestructible, wild, and reckless. But real Aries power isn't reckless. It's tactical. And that's why Aries chooses solitude, not to rest, but to recharge with precision. Let's clear up a myth. Aries isn't tired because they're weak. They're tired because they give everything. Every interaction, every decision, every emotional response, it all burns energy. Fast. In public, Aries is often the fire starter, the one sparking ideas, fueling energy in the room, raising the stakes, pushing the pace, but that's not sustainable without a private ritual to refuel. And that ritual? Silence, autonomy, control, aloneness. I once knew an Aries firefighter, literally. He was the guy who ran toward the flames, always the first in, always the last out. Everyone thought he was a machine, but every Sunday he disappeared. No phone, no visitors, just him, a hiking trail, and a journal. He called it his battlefield break. That's when I realized Aries doesn't escape the world. Aries steps away to prepare for the next mission. Because the real warrior doesn't just fight, they know when to retreat strategically. Let's look at the astrology. Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet of war, action, and raw force. And just like any warrior, Aries doesn't waste energy, they deploy it. That's why their solitude isn't lounging around or passive escapism, it's active recovery, like a fighter training alone at dawn, or a commander planning silently between battles. When alone, Aries isn't resting the way others do. They might be slamming through a high-intensity workout, deep cleaning their apartment like it's a ritual purge, planning 6 months of goals, or just walking with intensity, recalibrating their mental state. This is their version of plugging in, not by slowing down, but by redirecting their force inward. What the world sees as impulsive burnout is actually part of a larger pattern. Output, withdrawal, recharge, return stronger. And here's the magic. The most powerful Aries have learned to sense the burn before it happens. They don't wait until they collapse. They disappear preemptively, like a general pulling troops out of battle to regroup before the tide turns. It's not avoidance, it's strategic awareness. For those around Aries, this can be confusing. They were just full of life, full of ideas, and suddenly, nothing. But once you understand their rhythm, it makes sense. Aries doesn't run out. Aries resets. They go from external performance to internal realignment, from being the spark for others to becoming the fuel for themselves. And when they're ready, they don't come back slowly. They explode back into life like they never left. Here's the deeper truth. Most people recharge by being with others. They vent, they connect, they cry it out. But Aries, they don't want your energy. They want their own energy back. That can only happen in solitude when there's no one to impress, no one to lead, no one to save, just space to be unapologetically themselves. So if you ever see an Aries go quiet, disappear, or go off the radar, don't panic. They're not breaking down. They're powering up. Their absence is not abandonment. It's an act of sacred self-maintenance. In the next part, we'll dive into a side of Aries the world rarely sees, how being alone becomes their secret laboratory for bold, world-changing innovation. This isn't just about energy anymore, it's about evolution. Let's continue. Reason number 3, bold innovation needs privacy. You can't invent the future while explaining yourself to the past. Aries is a fire starter, not just in action, but in ideas. And their greatest visions, the kind that break systems, redefine possibilities, and scare average minds, don't come from brainstorming circles or feedback meetings. They're born in isolation, in silence, in moments no one else sees. Because bold innovation, the kind Aries is wired for, requires one sacred condition: freedom from interruption. People often misunderstand the Aries mind. They see passion, action, movement. But what they miss is the furnace behind it all. The inner lab where Aries dreams without permission, without edits, and without judgment. You see, Aries is not just a doer. They're a visionary executor. Someone who sees what's not yet visible and has the guts to chase it before it makes sense. But that kind of creation doesn't thrive under scrutiny. It needs room to breathe before it's questioned into silence. I once knew an Aries woman who invented an eco-startup out of nothing. She had no investors, no team, and no experience in the industry. But she had an idea, a burning one, that wouldn't leave her alone. For 3 months, she disappeared from every friend group. No brunches, no updates, no texts. She worked alone from a tiny apartment in Portland, surrounded by sketches, charts, and a notebook filled with what she called mad ideas. Today, that mad idea is a national sustainability platform. Because Aries doesn't need consensus, they need isolation to create something bold enough that consensus eventually follows. Let's go deeper into this fire sign's psychology Unlike air signs who refine ideas by talking them out loud, or earth signs who need to build slow and steady with structure, Aries needs spontaneous eruption, mental lightning bolts that strike in the quiet and ignite into action immediately. But around people, that lightning gets filtered, judged, diluted. Is that practical? What if it fails? That's too risky. These are the death sentences of Aries creativity. That's why they vanish. Not because they're avoiding people, but because the birth of innovation is too sacred to be babysat. Solitude becomes a sacred laboratory for Aries. It's where the mind wanders without shame, where experiments fail loudly without witnesses, where ideas mutate into genius without ever asking permission to exist. You might find them in this state, scribbling across pages like a possessed poet, rearranging furniture at 2 a.m. for better energy flow, starting 5 unfinished prototypes at once, talking to themselves out loud like there's an invisible boardroom. To outsiders, it looks chaotic. To Aries, it's flow. This is why Aries doesn't always share their ideas early on, not because they're secretive, but because they're protective. They know that premature exposure kills boldness. They'd rather guard the embryo of an idea in private than risk it being dissected by the cautious minds of the world. And when they finally do unveil it, it's not up for debate, it's already done. Here's the lesson. If you love or lead an Aries, give them room to go silent. When they vanish into solitude, they're not flaking. They're building worlds you can't see yet. And if you're an Aries watching this, honor that sacred space. Stop apologizing for needing to disappear in order to create. Because the very idea that could change your life, or the world, might be waiting for you in the quiet you keep avoiding. Innovation doesn't knock, it whispers, and only the quiet mind hears it. In the next part, we're leaving the world of ideas and stepping into the inner arena, where Aries competes not with others, but with themselves. This isn't external battle, it's self-mastery. Reason number 4, the inner competition that drives Aries. Aries doesn't compete to beat others. Aries competes to beat the person they were yesterday. If there's one trait people most commonly associate with Aries, it's competitiveness. They're the first to raise their hand, the first to cross the line, the first to start, and sometimes the first to crash gloriously. But here's what most people misunderstand. Aries isn't obsessed with winning. They're obsessed with evolving. Their true rivalry isn't with the world, it's with the version of themselves that existed just 24 hours ago. And for that kind of battle, they need privacy, not a crowd, not an audience, not a scorecard, just a mirror, a clock, and the raw edge of their own willpower. Solitude is where Aries enters their private arena. No cheering, no judgment. Just the echo of discipline bouncing off the walls. This is where the real work happens. It's where they push their limits without applause, critique themselves without mercy, set impossible goals, and then crush them. Train in silence, sweat, and self-honesty. I knew an Aries personal trainer once, Marcus. He looked like a machine when he trained others, shouting encouragement, demonstrating perfect form, pushing people to their limits. But every morning at 4:45 a.m., before the world even stirred, Marcus was alone in the gym. No playlist, no mirror selfies, no hype, just brutal self-discipline. He wasn't trying to show off, he was sharpening himself against himself. And that's the Aries secret. Their most intense battles happen when no one is watching. In group settings, Aries might joke, boast, or flash charisma, but when alone, that bravado drops. What's left is something far more powerful, the seeker of mastery. They study their weaknesses with a cold eye, They isolate skills, tear them down, rebuild them better. And they do it without needing praise, because self-improvement is the reward. It's not a performance, it's warrior training. This is why Aries needs solitude. In public, competition becomes about status. In solitude, it becomes about self-evolution. The Aries in isolation sets goals that seem absurd. Run farther today than yesterday. Finish the project in half the time. Break the habit before the next moon cycle. Master the skill everyone says is too hard. They're not doing it to be admired. They're doing it because they know growth never happens at comfort's pace. Let's break it down astrologically. Aries is a cardinal fire sign, designed to initiate, ignite, and push forward. Ruled by Mars, the planet of warriors and action, Aries thrives in challenge. But their greatest battles aren't fought on stages. They're fought in solitude. Where other signs might coast when no one's watching, Aries accelerates. Because solitude removes distractions. And when the external world fades, the internal voice grows louder and more demanding. Do better. Move faster. Try again. You know you can. This isn't punishment, it's purpose. If you've ever wondered why an Aries friend disappears for weeks only to come back stronger, sharper, or transformed, it wasn't a crisis. It was a personal trial. Solitude is their secret dojo, their workshop, their boot camp. And the results? A level up so dramatic, it makes people wonder, when did they become this powerful? Answer, when they were alone, choosing progress over praise. Here's the lesson. Aries doesn't need an opponent to compete. They are the challenger, the competitor, and the prize, all at once. And their solitude isn't avoidance. It's where their evolution strategy unfolds with full force. Aries doesn't disappear to rest. They disappear to become. In the next part, we'll explore one of the most misunderstood aspects of Aries solitude. Why Aries needs to be alone just to stop explaining themselves. No justifications, no translations, just action. You won't want to miss this insight. Let's keep going. Reason number 5, freedom from explaining themselves. Aries doesn't need your permission to act, but the world keeps asking them to justify their instincts. If you've ever watched an Aries make a decision, you'll notice it's not a process, it's a spark. Instant, unfiltered, bold. They decide in seconds what others take days to deliberate. They trust their gut like it's a compass from the gods. They leap, not because they're reckless, but because they know. But here's the problem. The world moves slower, and it keeps asking Aries to pause and explain. Why are you doing that? Can you walk me through your thought process? That feels too fast. Are you sure? And just like that, the fire dims. That's why Aries cherishes solitude. In their own space, there's no need to translate. No one's second-guessing their intuition. No one's asking for a 5-step explanation for a decision that took 5 heartbeats. In solitude, they act. Purely, fully, instinctively. And that's where they're most alive. Let me give you a real example. An Aries friend of mine, Rachel, once quit her 6-figure job, moved to New Mexico, and started an aerial yoga retreat, all in 72 hours. No planning committee, no farewell tour, just boom, decision made. People thought she was losing it, but in her words, I knew, and I was tired of explaining my knowing. What they didn't see was that Rachel had spent months suppressing that instinct. In group meetings, she'd suggest bold ideas, only to be asked to back it up. In conversations, her passions were often seen as too much. She didn't vanish because she was impulsive. She vanished because she was tired of shrinking her fire just to make others comfortable. Let's tie this back to astrology. Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet of direct action, assertion, and instinct. They're not here to debate endlessly. They're here to move. Their decisions come from the gut, from that primal, powerful space that says, "Go now, figure it out on the way." And they do, because Aries doesn't need to know how the whole staircase looks. They just need to see the first step, and they're already halfway there. But that speed, that instinct, it scares people. And what people fear, they demand explanations for, which leads to the most exhausting part of the Aries experience, having to explain what already feels obvious. In social settings, Aries is constantly decoding their inner fire into acceptable terms, slowing down their speech, justifying their excitement, diluting their urgency to match the room's comfort level. It's like running a race while dragging a weight behind them, the weight of needing to make sense to slower energies. That's why solitude is sacred. It's the only space where they can move at full speed without checking to see if anyone's confused, intimidated, or asking for a manual. Solitude gives Aries something rare, the freedom to just be, to trust their gut, to act on impulse, to change direction mid-sentence or mid-life without needing to submit a report. It's not irresponsibility, it's sovereignty, and it's where their real power ignites. Here's what many people miss. Aries is not afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being slowed down and having to constantly explain, defend, or soften their instincts. That's not connection, it's corrosion. Alone, they are pure. Alone, they're fast. Alone, they're undeniably themselves. So, the next time an Aries makes a decision that shocks everyone and then disappears, understand this: they're not ghosting you. They're simply protecting the sacred spark that told them to move before the world could talk them out of it. Aries doesn't need approval. They need space to follow fire. In the next part, we'll explore something raw, physical, and deeply emotional. Why Aries needs solitude to express themselves without filters, through movement, voice, and raw energy. It's not drama, it's release, and it's one of the truest forms of Aries authenticity. Let's continue. Reason number 6. Unfiltered self-expression. The loudest Aries isn't the one on stage. It's the one alone in a room, shouting into the void, dancing like war, and breathing like fire. There's something wild and uncontainable about Aries energy. It's not just passion, it's raw expression. And while the world sees Aries as bold and loud, the truth is far more complex. In public, Aries wears a mask of controlled intensity. They're expected to lead, to inspire, to perform with purpose, but even fire has boundaries when it's burning in someone else's house. That's why solitude isn't just desirable, it's liberating. Let me show you what most people never see. When Aries is truly alone, no eyes, no filters, no pressure, something powerful happens. They become fully themselves. They talk to themselves out loud, acting out future victories. They punch the air with invisible rivals. They pace like warriors in a mental arena. They cry, scream, sing, collapse, sometimes all in 1 hour. It's not chaos, it's release. Aries doesn't perform for attention. They perform to purge, and the only safe place to do that? In solitude. I remember an Aries client I once coached, a corporate executive by day, charismatic, calculated, commanding. But she told me her favorite time of day wasn't the boardroom. It was midnight, when she locked her bedroom door, turned up her music, and danced like she was fighting her own demons. No choreography, no audience, just movement and sweat. She said, "It's the only time I don't have to dim myself." See, despite their reputation for being too much, Aries actually spends most of their time holding back. In relationships, they lower their volume. At work, they filter their opinions. In society, they scale down their passion to avoid overwhelming others. But fire doesn't shrink to survive. It needs room to expand, or it smothers itself. Solitude gives Aries that room. No one telling them to calm down. No one asking them to be more polite or less intense. No pressure to translate their energy into something digestible, just full-bodied expression, as wild and sacred as it was meant to be. Let's connect this astrologically. Aries is ruled by Mars, the god of war, the god of raw impulse, action, and physicality. This sign doesn't just think emotions, they embody them. That's why Aries doesn't always talk about feelings, they move through them. Anger becomes a sprint, excitement becomes a creative storm, sadness becomes shadowboxing in a dark room. Where other signs intellectualize or spiritualize their emotions, Aries needs to physicalize them, and that only happens without an audience. This is also why so many Aries are secretly artistic, not in the polished, performative way, but in the visceral, primal, fearless way. They write poetry they never show. They sketch designs no one sees. They compose voice memos of ideas too raw to share. Why? Because in solitude, they're not editing for approval. They're expressing to survive. Here's the deeper truth. Every Aries has an inner flame that burns with both creation and destruction. It's their sacred responsibility to keep it lit. And to do that, they must regularly empty themselves of stress, tension, emotion, even joy, in the most honest way possible. That honesty can't happen in front of people, not even the ones they trust, because with people, Aries is leading, but alone, they're releasing. And that release isn't weakness, it's how they make space for their next transformation. So if you love an Aries and you hear them laughing to themselves behind a closed door, if you find them dancing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., if they vanish for a weekend and return clearer, sharper, lighter, don't ask them to explain. Just know this. In solitude, Aries isn't hiding. They're unleashing what the world can't handle. In the next part, we'll dive into something Aries guards fiercely, the need to control their environment as an extension of their power. Because for Aries, the space around them isn't just decoration, it's a battlefield they must command. Let's keep going. Reason number 7. Environmental control is sacred for Aries. An Aries can command a battlefield, but lose their mind in a messy room. Sounds dramatic? Not if you understand what's truly at stake. Because for Aries, environment isn't background, it's battleground. Every chair, every beam of light, every sound, every object in their orbit either fuels their fire or threatens to dim it. That's why, when they're alone, Aries becomes something you don't always see in public, a master of their space, a ruler of their realm. And that need for dominion, it's not about aesthetics, it's about alignment. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. I once worked with an Aries startup founder named Chase. In the office, he was loud, brilliant, intimidating, but constantly agitated. Meetings didn't start on time, the lights were too harsh, people left coffee cups where they didn't belong. It wasn't about OCD, it was about energy flow. So Chase built a private workspace behind the main floor, just 12 by 12 feet. Soft lighting, minimalist furniture, one wall painted fire red. Nobody else was allowed inside. He called it the cockpit. That's where all his best ideas were born. Because finally, everything was under his command. Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet of war, instinct, and tactical control. Mars doesn't thrive in chaos, it thrives in readiness. And for Aries, that readiness is reflected in their environment. The temperature they need, the music they choose, the layout that makes sense to their unique brain. In shared spaces, they're constantly adapting, adjusting, compromising. But alone, every inch of space becomes an extension of their will. That's why Aries often rearranges furniture at random hours, why they get annoyed when someone moves their keys or adjusts the lighting, why they can't focus in spaces that don't feel right, even if they can't explain why. It's not pettiness, it's psychic protection. The Aries mind is always on, scanning, planning, pushing. So, the external world must be strategically optimized for clarity and speed. They're not trying to create luxury, they're creating a launch pad. Alone, Aries transforms their environment into a personal war room. Some light incense, some blast music, some go full Spartan minimalism. Others fill the space with color, movement, mirrors, art. But the common denominator? Intention. Nothing is random. Everything is there for a reason. And that reason always ties back to performance, focus, and inner fire. Even time becomes part of the environment. Alone, Aries controls not just space, but schedule. They don't want to eat at noon because that's lunchtime. They eat when they're hungry. They don't sleep at midnight because the world does. They sleep when their engine needs to shut down. Solitude gives them the sovereignty to listen to their own internal rhythms, not society's. That's why they love solo mornings, late nights, random bursts of productivity at 3:27 a.m. Because finally, they set the tempo. If you've ever wondered why an Aries hates working in someone else's space, why they always want just one room to themselves, why they can't relax when their home feels disordered, it's because their power is spatial and their nervous system is wired for command, not compromise. They're not trying to control you, they're trying to anchor themselves in a world that constantly pulls them off-center. Here's the insight most people miss. Aries doesn't need a castle. They just need a place where they call every shot, because that place becomes their engine room, their refueling chamber, their planning center, their therapy, their sanctuary. Without it, they burn out. With it, they rise. So if an Aries disappears into a private room, builds a workspace no one else is allowed to enter, or obsessively adjusts their environment, let them. Because in that space, they're not just cleaning, they're not just decorating, they're reclaiming control of their mind, their energy, and their future. In the next part, we'll enter the most underrated zone of Aries solitude, the private mental gym, where Aries prepares for battles the world doesn't even know are coming. This is where strategy is born, and why Aries surprises everyone when they strike. Let's continue. Reason number 8, mental battlefield training. Aries moves fast, but they think faster, in silence, in secret, and with surgical precision. There's a popular myth about Aries, that they leap before they look, that they act first and think later. But anyone who truly knows an Aries, especially when they're alone, knows the truth. They've already run every scenario in their mind, while you were still overanalyzing the first step. Because beneath the fire and speed is a tactical mind. And that mind doesn't do its best work in meetings, conversations, or crowded spaces. It operates best when it's alone, behind a closed door, pacing, plotting, and preparing for battles most people never even see coming. Let me paint a picture. You walk in on an Aries, alone in their living room. No music, no screen, no distractions. They're pacing like a general, muttering to themselves, eyes sharp, body tense. To an outsider, it looks odd. But what's really happening? Mental battlefield training. They're simulating conversations, anticipating attacks, preparing counters, visualizing outcomes. And it's not paranoia, it's readiness. I once worked with an Aries lawyer, one of the top trial strategists in her city, but she rarely spoke in early meetings. She didn't brainstorm out loud or debate theories in public. Instead, she'd take long walks by herself before every major case. She called it war rehearsal. She'd map every possible move, both hers and her opponent's. She didn't just study the facts. She imagined the psychology, the tone, the moment when pressure would strike, and how to flip it. People said she was lucky in court. They didn't know she'd already lived the trial 100 times, in silence. This is what Aries does when they're alone, not just think, but simulate. They walk through possibilities like a chess grandmaster. They picture conflict and conquer it mentally before it even arrives. And this only works without interruption, because strategy for Aries is a flow state. One break in that stream, a phone call, a question, what are you thinking about? And the whole vision collapses. Astrologically, this makes perfect sense. Aries is ruled by Mars, a planet not just of war, but of tactics. Mars doesn't just charge. Mars studies terrain, measures angles, times attacks. So while Aries may strike suddenly in the real world, it's often after hours of silent preparation in the mental realm. They just don't tell you they were planning, because they don't need credit, they need results. And the solitude, that's the dojo, the strategy room, the war table. It's where they break down past mistakes, rerun conversations they wish went differently, practice responses they might need tomorrow, sharpen arguments, comebacks, tactics. It's mental martial arts, and it's deadly effective. So, if someone says Aries is impulsive, ask them, have you ever watched an Aries prepare in private? Because those explosive decisions, those confident moves, they come from invisible drills that happen long before anyone else notices. Here's the deeper truth. Aries doesn't just train their body, they train their mind, and they train it alone, where the noise stops and the plan begins. So when an Aries retreats, disappears for hours, maybe even days, pacing in silence or muttering to the ceilings, let them. Because what they're building in that silence is the strategy that will win the next war in their life. Don't mistake stillness for stagnation. For Aries, silence is strategy. In the next part, we'll uncover a powerful paradox, why Aries' solitude is the key to their fierce independence, and how being alone proves they need no one to survive. It's not ego, it's identity. Let's explore it. Reason 9. Independence, reinforcement. Aries doesn't isolate because they're broken. They isolate to prove they never needed anyone to begin with. There's a fire burning inside every Aries, not just for action, but for autonomy. It's not arrogance, it's a deep-rooted code written into their DNA. I must be able to stand alone, or I'm not standing at all. That's why Aries' solitude is more than just peace and quiet. It's a testing ground, a forge where they verify the truth of their most sacred belief. I am enough. I always have been. See, while other signs seek reassurance in relationships or comfort in connection, Aries seeks proof of personal power. They want to know, can I get through this without help? Can I carry my own weight? Emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Can I feed myself, fight for myself, heal myself, completely alone? And when they can answer yes, that's when they walk back into the world with a confidence that's unshakable, because it's been earned, not given. I knew an Aries man, a creative director in New York. One day, after a painful breakup, he vanished from social life. No texts, no parties, no distractions. Just him, his work, and four walls. People thought he was spiraling. He wasn't. He was training. He told me later, I needed to remember that I don't need someone else to validate me. I've always been my own source. When he re-emerged 3 months later, he was sharper, stronger, not colder, just clearer. His independence had been reaffirmed through isolation. That's what Aries does in solitude. They strip everything back. No emotional safety nets, no external motivation, no applause or feedback, just raw self-reliance. And in that quiet, they prove to themselves again and again that they don't just survive alone, they thrive. Let's tie this to astrology. As the first sign of the zodiac, Aries is the cosmic newborn, entering the wheel with pure individuality. Before relationships, before tribe, before compromise, there's self. That's why Aries doesn't want to be independent. They are independent. But like any warrior, they must periodically test the blade. Solitude is that test. If they feel codependent, if they sense they're leaning too hard on someone, if they catch themselves doubting their own strength, they pull away, not out of spite, but out of necessity, because Aries would rather be alone and strong than connected and diluted. This is also why Aries often ends relationships before they get soft. They can sense when they're about to lose the edge, when comfort becomes complacency, when support becomes dependence. That's when the alarm bells go off, and that's when they retreat into solitude to recenter their fire. But here's the twist. When Aries confirms their independence in solitude, they actually return to relationships in a better way. Why? Because now they're not needing you, they're choosing you, and that choice comes from a place of fullness, not lack. This makes Aries paradoxically more present, generous, and clear in their bonds. Because they know they could walk away, but they don't. That's not detachment. That's the ultimate act of empowered connection. So if an Aries you know disappears, goes silent, or insists on doing things their way, don't take it personally. They're not pushing you away. They're pulling themselves back together. And when they come back, there'll be someone you can actually lean on, because they've already proven they don't need to lean on you. For Aries, solitude isn't isolation, it's initiation into their next level of self-trust. In the next part, we'll uncover something surprisingly emotional. How Aries uses solitude as an emotional reset, processing faster than most, not because they don't feel deeply, but because they move through emotions like warriors. Let's continue. Reason number 10. Emotional reset button. Aries doesn't dwell, they detonate, clear the rubble, and rebuild by sunrise. To outsiders, Aries seems emotionally bulletproof. They cry less, they bounce back fast. They're strong, resilient, tough. But what most people don't understand is this. Aries feels everything, just faster, deeper, louder. And then, it's gone. Not because they avoid emotions, but because they process them like they do everything else, with fire and full force. And to do that, they need solitude. In a room full of people, Aries is performing, not for show, but for control. They're holding it together, clenching their jaw, forcing the smile, redirecting the rage into sarcasm, burying the disappointment in laughter. But the minute that door closes, the minute no one's watching, the real emotional release begins. I knew an Aries woman, sharp, confident, always composed in public. After a brutal rejection at work, she didn't break down in the parking lot. She drove home, locked the door, turned up her playlist, and for 1 full hour, she cried, screamed, punched a pillow, and danced until her legs gave out. The next day, she walked into that office with fire in her eyes, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. She'd hit her emotional reset button in solitude. Here's the thing about Aries emotions. They come in waves of intensity, quick, sudden, full body. Anger flares in seconds. Hurt pierces like a blade. Joy explodes without warning. But unlike other signs, Aries doesn't need to sit with these emotions for days. They need to feel them fully, physically, and privately. And then they're done. This isn't detachment, it's emotional efficiency. Let's go deeper into astrology. Aries is a cardinal fire sign, built for motion, not rumination. They aren't designed to carry emotional weight like a backpack. They burn it up. But only when they're alone can they do this unfiltered. Yell into a pillow, shadowbox the air, go for a midnight run, write a rage-fueled journal entry, laugh until they collapse from the release. They're not being dramatic. They're purging the storm. And when the emotion is gone, it's gone. No grudges, no festering, no need to revisit it again and again. This is why Aries often confuses others. How can they be that angry and then fine? How did they move on already? Because you didn't see what happened in the alone time. You didn't see the explosion, you're just seeing the ashes swept clean. This is also why Aries doesn't always open up to others during emotional crises. Not because they're cold, but because explaining their feelings slows down the process. They don't want to be talked through it. They don't want analysis. They don't want your soft eyes and questions. They want a space to feel hard, fast, real, and done. Solitude becomes a sacred container for that emotional detox. No pressure to perform, no fear of being too much, no shame in being raw, just release. Reset, rise. Here's the powerful insight. Aries isn't emotionally shallow. They're emotionally self-cleaning. And if you love one, let them retreat. Don't chase. Don't beg them to open up in the moment. Trust that when they come back, they're not avoiding you. They're showing up whole again. Because for Aries, solitude isn't silence. It's where the fire burns hottest and clears everything in its path. In the next part, we'll explore something more thrilling: why Aries seeks out solo adventure, the kind that's undiluted, pure, and totally designed on their terms. It's not that they don't like people, it's that freedom feels better alone. Let's explore it. Reason number 11, undiluted adventure. Aries doesn't need company to chase the horizon. In fact, they prefer to race it, alone, unfiltered, and unapologetically. There's a part of Aries that's always hunting for something new, for something fast, for something thrilling. Not to escape life, but to feel more alive inside it. And while Aries can absolutely enjoy group travel or shared experiences, the truth is, the most electrifying adventures they ever have are the ones they take alone. Why? Because alone, the adventure belongs to no one but them. No schedules, no compromises, no waiting around. Just instinct, action, and total freedom. No one asking, "Where are we going next? Are you sure this is safe? Can we slow down a little?" Alone, Aries can go wherever their fire leads. At full speed, full volume, full risk. I once met an Aries traveler in Utah. She'd rented a car with no set route, drove for 5 hours into the desert with nothing but a journal, camera, and 2 bottles of water. No GPS, no reservations, no plan. She found a rock formation no one had Instagrammed, camped there overnight, woke up at sunrise and wrote 3 poems she said felt like they'd been buried in her blood for years. When I asked if she was scared being out there alone, she smiled and said, "Scared?" That was the first time I felt completely mine. That's what Aries craves: undiluted experience. Adventure with no filter, freedom with no leash, excitement at its most pure. Even with people they love, Aries subconsciously adjusts. Should I tone it down? Will they keep up? Is this too risky for them? But alone? They don't ask. They go. This is deeper than thrill-seekings. It's about alignment with their spirit. Aries is ruled by Mars, the warrior, but not just of battle, also of conquest, discovery, territory. They were born to explore, initiate, dive in. And every solo journey becomes a ceremony of self-trust, choosing direction in the moment, responding to instinct, not itinerary, facing unknowns without a buffer and realizing, I don't need anyone to hold my hand. I've got me. These solo quests don't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's a midnight walk with no destination, a road trip with music loud enough to shake the windows, a dive into a creative project that consumes 3 straight days, a spontaneous class or workshop they booked an hour before it started. But always the essence is the same. I chose this. No one designed it for me, and no one can take it away. Here's the truth. Aries doesn't avoid people. They just want experiences that reflect their soul. Wild, fast, raw, real. And often, the only way to do that is to go it alone. Because solo adventure isn't just fun for Aries, it's healing. It returns them to their elemental self, the self that doesn't wait, doesn't explain, and doesn't dilute. So if an Aries books a trip without you, wanders off during the party, or starts a new journey you didn't even know they were planning, don't take it personally. They're not leaving you, they're returning to themselves. Because in solitude, Aries finds the adventure they were born for. In the final part of this journey, we'll uncover a secret that very few ever get to witness. The private moments where Aries drops the armor and embraces the sacred vulnerability they never show in public. Because even warriors bleed in silence. Let's complete this path. Reason number 12. Secret vulnerability time. Everyone sees Aries as fire, but what they don't know is how often that fire is quietly burning through tears. Aries wears strength like a second skin. They're known as bold, assertive, unstoppable. They step forward when others step back. They keep moving when others freeze. They fight even when they're wounded. But behind that invincible image, there's something sacred. Something few people ever get to witness. Aries feels deeply, and they hurt, privately, intensely, silently. This is why solitude matters so much. Because for Aries, vulnerability isn't a group activity. It's not something to be shared over coffee or therapy circles. It's something to be faced alone, with the door closed, the world shut out, and the truth finally allowed to speak. I once knew an Aries woman, a single mother, a business owner, a fighter in every sense. People called her the strongest person I've ever met. What they didn't see were the nights she sat in her car after dropping off her kid, staring at the dashboard for an hour, crying so quietly, not even her breath made a sound. Not because she was broken, but because she needed that private space to feel it all, without having to explain, without risking someone misinterpreting her softness as weakness. She told me later, "If I fall apart in front of people, they'll think I'm not capable. But when I fall apart alone, I can rebuild on my own terms." That's the Aries paradox. They'll take a bullet for the people they love, but they'll never show you where it hit. Because their pain isn't for display, it's a sacred ritual, reserved for solitude. Astrologically, this runs deep. Aries is ruled by Mars, the warrior archetype. And every true warrior knows, you don't tend your wounds in front of your enemies. You retreat, heal in silence, and return ready. So when Aries pulls away, goes silent, becomes emotionally unavailable, they're not shutting you out, they're guarding the one part of themselves they can't afford to expose to misunderstanding. Their doubts, their shame, their fear that they're not as strong as they pretend to be. And here's what most people will never guess. Aries doubts themselves more than they let on. Did I make the wrong call? Am I too much? What if I fail and no one catches me? But they won't voice these out loud, not unless they trust you with their entire soul. Because once that armor comes off, they're not half vulnerable, they're completely raw. And that kind of exposure, they only allow it when no one's watching. So what do they do in that sacred space? Journal pages torn and burned, songs played on repeat to echo what they can't say. Long showers where they cry until the water goes cold, standing in the dark, just breathing, and forgiving themselves for being human. These aren't breakdowns, they're soul resets. And when they're done, they put the armor back on. But this time, it fits a little better, because now it covers truth, not suppression. Here's the deepest truth. Aries doesn't avoid vulnerability. They revere it, but only when it's earned or when it's safe. And often the only safe place is solitude. So if an Aries retreats and you sense something's wrong, but they won't talk, respect it. Love them enough to let them have that sacred silence, and trust that when they emerge, they'll be more honest, more present, and more whole. Because Aries doesn't share their pain casually. They share it like a warrior removes armor, carefully, slowly, and only when necessary. Behind every Aries flame is a heart that bleeds in silence and heals in solitude. In our final part, we'll bring this full circle, the conclusion. How Aries solitude isn't a retreat, but a return to power, and how those who understand this will never misread an Aries silence again. Let's complete the journey. Conclusion: solitude is where Aries becomes power. You thought Aries disappeared, but what they really did was return to where their power lives. Over the past 13 parts, we've unraveled the mystery behind Aries solitude. And what we found wasn't distance, it was depth. Because when Aries walks away, they're not rejecting the world, they're reconnecting with themselves. Let's remember what we've discovered. They vanish because the world moves too slow for their natural speed. They retreat to recharge energy no one else sees them losing. They create best when no one's watching. Bold, messy, genius. They don't compete with you. They battle yesterday's version of themselves. They need freedom from justifying their instincts. They express emotions and creativity at full volume, only behind closed doors. They require command of their space to function with clarity and force. They plan, simulate, and prepare mentally in silence, not chaos. They disappear to reaffirm one thing: I can do this alone. They purge emotions like fire, quick, intense, private. They chase adventure not for fun, but to feel utterly alive. And beneath all of it, they bleed in silence, because showing pain is sacred, not casual. Every one of these reasons points to the same core truth. Solitude isn't Aries' escape, it's their sacred forge. The place they sharpen their blade, shed what no longer serves, invent what hasn't been seen, and rise again, stronger, bolder, truer. They don't come back from solitude the same, they come back transformed. So what does this mean for the rest of us? If you love an Aries, if you lead one, follow one, or live beside one, understand this: their silence is not rejection, it's a rite of passage. Don't rush them out of it. Don't guilt them for needing space. Don't interpret their retreat as disconnection. Instead, trust that when they return, they'll bring back more clarity, more passion, more fire than ever before. And if you are an Aries watching this right now, this is your reminder. You are not selfish for needing solitude. You are not broken for not wanting to explain. You are not lost when you walk alone. You are becoming. And your silence is not emptiness, it is sacred preparation. So take your space, honor your rhythm, disappear when you need to, and when you return, do it like you always do, with fire, with purpose, and with no apologies. This is the truth about Aries. They don't vanish because they're done. They vanish because they're just getting started. And when they re-emerge from solitude, the world shifts. Call to action. If this journey helped you understand yourself or someone you love in a deeper way, share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of Aries' solitude resonated most with you? Have you ever misunderstood an Aries' silence or been misunderstood yourself? We want to hear your story. Subscribe to Zodiac Secrets Revealed for more soul-level astrology, not just traits, but truth. Because here, we don't just study the stars, we reveal what they're really trying to tell us. Until next time, remember, Aries doesn't need the world's permission to evolve, only the space to do it on their own terms.